They told her she didn't belong. Not in the meeting rooms filled with polished suits. Not at the head of a company steering innovation. Not in the world of business where power was traded in handshakes she was never offered. They laughed at her dream, dismissing it as audacity. Yet what they failed to understand is that sometimes the very thing the world rejects is the very thing it needs most. This is not simply a story about one woman's rise to success. It is the story of defiance against doubt, of courage in the face of exclusion, of perseverance when the world tried to slam the door shut. It is the story of a black woman who carried the weight of stereotypes on her shoulders but chose to stand taller because of them. She was told she was unworthy, unqualified, out of place. Yet with every rejection, she carved a new path forward, not just for herself, but for those who would follow. In her journey, we see the reflection of countless others, or ordinary people who dared to do extraordinary things, who held faith in the unseen, who turned the sound of doubters into fuel for transformation. Hers is a reminder that change is never born in comfort, it is born in resistance. It is born in the quiet strength of those who choose to rise anyway. She was told she didn't belong, not in the room, not at the table, not in business. For years, the laughter of doubters echoed louder than the sound of her own ideas. They said her vision was too bold, her courage too dangerous, her presence too disruptive. She carried the weight of stereotypes, the sting of dismissal, and the heavy silence of being underestimated. But where others saw limits, she saw possibility. Where others mocked her ambition, she built discipline. Where others denied her place, she carved her own. She started small, too small for most to notice, working late nights at the kitchen table, turning obstacles into lessons, failures into fuel. Every setback became her teacher. Became her challenge. Every door that slammed shut pushed her to build her own. And then, one day, she wasn't just surviving, she was leading. Not only did she grow her business, but she created opportunities for others who had been ignored, overlooked, told, "You don't belong." She lifted up her employees, mentored young entrepreneurs, and invested in communities that the world had written off. Her story is not just about one CEO. It is about the truth that lies within every ordinary person who dares to believe in the extraordinary. It is about the single mother who keeps dreaming after a long day at work. The student who studies under a streetlight because the electricity is gone again. The worker who takes the night shift and still wakes up to build a side hustle. Each of them carries the same spirit, the unshakable belief that they, too, can rise. And today, we must remember the laughter of doubters is not the sound of destiny. It is the sound of fear. Fear of change. Fear of progress. Fear of someone daring to be more than what they were told they could be. The question is not whether you belong. The question is, are you willing to stand tall, even when the world tries to cut you down? Her story proves that perseverance beats prejudice. That courage outlasts criticism. That faith in yourself can transform the impossible into the inevitable. So let us rise. Let us build. Let us believe in the greatness within us and in each other. Because when one of us proves the doubters wrong, we all move forward. When we move forward together, there is no limit to what we can achieve. There are few forces in life as powerful and as destructive as doubt. Doubt from others can sound like laughter, sarcasm, or silence. Sometimes it's the dismissive glance in a boardroom when your ideas are brushed aside before you've even finished your sentence. Other times, it's the cruel words whispered behind your back, the judgments that cut deeper than any blade. Sometimes, the hardest kind of doubt is not what comes from others, but what seeps quietly into your own heart after years of hearing, "You can't." For the black woman who would one day rise to become a CEO, doubt was not an occasional visitor, it was her daily companion. In school, she was told to dream smaller. In job interviews, she was told she was not quite the right fit. When she began to sketch the blueprint of her business, outright, "You don't belong in business," they said. "This world is not made for people like you." But perseverance is not built in the sunshine. It is born in storms. It is forged in the moments when the world says no, and you choose to move forward anyway. She carried that doubt with her, but not as a weight. Instead, she used it as fuel. Every time she was told she couldn't, she worked harder to prove she could. When people expected her to stumble, She trained her steps to be steady. When they tried to shut her out, she learned how to open her own doors. There were nights when exhaustion felt heavier than the dream itself, nights when her bank account showed nothing but red, nights when she wondered if the world was right, if maybe they knew something she didn't. Yet even then, she refused to let the whispers of doubt write the final chapter. History is filled with people who endured the same struggle. Rosa Parks faced the sneers of those who thought she was just one woman. In the fight for civil rights, Nelson Mandela spent decades in prison, hearing the voices of an oppressive system telling him his resistance was useless. And yet, what did they all teach us? That perseverance is not the absence of fear or doubt, but the decision to keep moving in spite of them. Every community has its own unsung examples of perseverance. The single mother who wakes before dawn, juggling 2 jobs, still finds a way to study at night because she dreams of opening her own business. The young man works in a mechanic's shop, saving every coin because he knows education is his way forward. The immigrant who arrives with nothing but determination, facing language barriers, cultural barriers, and financial barriers, yet still finds a way to build a future for her children. These stories remind us that doubt is universal, but so is the strength to rise against it. Perseverance in the face of doubt requires discipline. It is not a single act of defiance, but 1,000 small choices to keep going when it feels easier to quit. It is answering rejection letters with more applications. It is answering laughter with silence and hard work. It is learning to embrace the long game when the world demands quick victories. But perseverance also requires vision. You must see something greater than the obstacles in front of you. She saw not just a company, but a legacy, a chance to create opportunities for others who had been told they didn't belong. That vision was what kept her steady when storms raged. And perseverance requires faith. Not always in the system, which may be flawed, not always in others who may doubt you, but in yourself. The quiet, unshakable belief that even if the path is long, even if the progress is slow, you are capable of more than what the world has written for you. Perseverance, in the end, is a declaration that the voices of doubt will not dictate your destiny. A declaration that you are more than the stereotypes, more than the judgments, more than the limitations that others try to place upon you. A declaration that every barrier is not the end of the road, but the beginning of your climb. Pain is a language everyone understands, though few ever speak of it openly. It can come in the form of loss, rejection, humiliation, the invisible weight of being told you are not enough. For many, pain feels like a chain, a force that restricts and silences. Yet for some, pain becomes something else entirely. It becomes a teacher, a spark, a tool. For the Black woman who dreamed of building her own business, pain was not theoretical. It was lived experience. She knew the sting of being underestimated, the ache of seeing her hard work dismissed, the wound of laughter echoing when she dared to dream out loud. Each moment left a scar, but scars are not just marks of survival. They are evidence of battles endured, proof of strength gained. In the early days of her journey, when rejection seemed endless, she could have let pain crush her resolve. She could have shrunk her dreams until they fit neatly into the world's low expectations. But instead, she found a way to reframe it. Pain became her signal that she was moving in the right direction. Because if the world resisted her so fiercely, it must have known she was capable of changing it. Pain has a strange alchemy sieve. It can either harden you into bitterness or refine you into brilliance. She chose the latter. When doors slammed shut, she turned the frustration into relentless preparation. When investors said no, she sharpened her pitch until it could no longer be ignored. When competitors mocked her, she used the sting to work longer, smarter, harder than those who doubted her. This ability to transform pain into power is not reserved for the extraordinary. It lives in ordinary people everywhere. Consider the child who grows up in poverty, enduring hunger and scarcity. For some, that pain becomes despair. But for others, it becomes fuel for ambition, a determination to create a future where their children will never know the same emptiness. Consider the athlete who suffers injury after injury, whose body tells them to quit, yet who channels that pain into discipline, mastering their craft until they rise stronger than before. Consider the worker who is laid off after years of loyalty, carrying the humiliation of being cast aside, but who turns that setback into the beginning of an entirely new chapter. Pain, when confronted with courage, becomes a source of clarity. It teaches you what matters, what you will no longer tolerate, and what you are capable of enduring. It strips away illusions and forces you to rely on resilience. It transforms ordinary struggle into extraordinary strength, but the transformation does not happen by accident. It demands choice. It demands that you look at pain not as punishment, but as preparation. It requires discipline to resist bitterness and channel the energy into building rather than breaking. It requires humility to learn from the very experiences you once wished away. For her, pain became the foundation of empathy. Because she had been dismissed, she knew how to recognize potential in others who were overlooked. Because she had been laughed at, she knew the importance of listening when others spoke their dreams. Because she had suffered rejection, she built a business culture that valued inclusion and dignity. Pain not only shaped her power, it shaped her leadership. The great figures of history embody this same truth. Frederick Douglass once said, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." Malala Yousafzai took the unimaginable pain of violence and turned it into global advocacy for education. Oprah Winfrey endured hardship and humiliation, yet used it as the very platform from which she built her influence. What all these stories reveal is not that pain disappears, but that it can be repurposed. It can be broken down and rebuilt into resilience, courage, and vision. Pain is universal. But power, true power, comes from deciding what to do with it. The world often teaches us to wait for permission. Permission to dream, permission to lead, permission to succeed. Many are told that opportunity will arrive if they simply stay patient, follow the rules, and hope for a chance. But history shows us that opportunity is not always handed down. It is often carved out, piece by piece, by those unwilling to wait. For the black woman who would one day rise to the top of her field, this truth was undeniable. She applied for jobs where her qualifications were impeccable, yet was told she lacked fit. She sat in meetings where her ideas were quietly stolen and praised under someone else's name. She knocked on doors that never opened, no matter how hard she knocked. At first, she wondered if persistence alone was enough, but she came to see what so many pioneers have realized: sometimes the doors will not open, not because you are unworthy, but because they were never built for you in the first place. And so she stopped waiting for permission. She stopped seeking validation from those who had already decided to underestimate her. Instead, she chose the harder path, the one where you do not walk through doors, but build them yourself. Carving your own path rarely looks glamorous. It looks like working from a small desk in a crowded apartment, pouring every spare dollar into your vision. It looks like long nights filled with uncertainty, designing a future no one else can see yet. It looks like being misunderstood, questioned, even ridiculed, because the path you walk is invisible to those who lack imagination. Yet history belongs to those who carve. Harriet Tubman did not wait for freedom to be granted. She created her own passage and then returned to free others. Madam C.J. Walker, born to parents who had once been enslaved, built her own business empire in a time when both her race and gender were seen as barriers too high to climb. Innovators in every field, from inventors to artists to leaders, have shown that the greatest achievements often come not from following the map, but from drawing a new one. To carve your own path is to embrace the unknown. There is no guarantee of success, no comfort of tradition, no assurance that the risk will pay off. But there is also freedom. Freedom to define success on your own terms. Freedom to build something that reflects not just what the world allows, but what your vision demands. Carving also requires courage. The courage to be misunderstood. The courage to walk alone when others turn away. The courage to see failure not as the end, but as part of the process. She understood that every step she took on her own path would be scrutinized more harshly, judged more critically. But she also knew that if she succeeded, she would create more than a business. She would create a precedent, a living proof that it could be done. And there is something else about carving your own path. It is never only for yourself. When you build a road through an untouched forest, others can walk it after you. When you scale a wall and leave behind a rope, others can climb too. Her business was not just about proving her worth. It was about creating opportunities for those who had been shut out, ignored, or told they did not belong. The path she carved became a passage for others. In every community, there are people quietly carving. The teacher who designs new methods to reach students others have given up on. The worker who turns a hobby into a side hustle, daring to believe it might one day sustain a family. The activist who speaks out when silence would be safer, shaping a way forward for those without a voice. Their work may not always make headlines, but their carving shapes the future in ways that ripple across generations. The act of carving is slow, painstaking, and filled with resistance. Rocks are not easily broken. Forests are not easily cleared. Systems are not easily changed. But those who pick up the tools and begin the work show us what it means to live with vision and purpose. The stories that often capture headlines are those of billionaires, world leaders, or celebrities. We are told their lives are exceptional, their talents unmatched, their destinies unique. Yet, when we look closely at the arc of history, it becomes clear that change is rarely driven by the extraordinary few. It is built on the shoulders of ordinary people who dared to believe their lives mattered enough to act. Ordinary people are the teachers who rise before dawn to prepare lessons for children, even when their pay is small and their classrooms overcrowded. Ordinary people are the workers who keep hospitals clean, streets safe, and food on the shelves, often without recognition, applause, or acknowledgement. Ordinary people are the parents who sacrifice their own comfort so their children can have a chance at a future better than their own. And yet, these acts of perseverance, repeated over time, create extraordinary impact. The woman who became a CEO began her journey not as someone destined for headlines, but as an ordinary worker in an ordinary town. She didn't have inherited wealth or a family name to open doors. She didn't have a chorus of supporters ready to cheer her on. She had her determination, her skill, and her willingness to keep going when others might have stopped. To the world, she was ordinary. But her ordinary life became the seed of something extraordinary. Think of the civil rights movement. It was not only the voices of leaders on podiums that shifted the world, but the countless men, women, and children who marched in the streets, lunch counters, and endured arrest and violence. They were students, bus drivers, maids, farmers. Their names may never appear in textbooks, but their impact is written into the freedom we experience today. Think of the workers who built railroads, factories, schools, and cities. They were not celebrated as visionaries. They did not receive statues or titles. Yet the very foundations of modern life were laid by hands that the world considered ordinary. The truth is, extraordinary impact rarely announces itself at the beginning. It begins with small actions. A choice to speak when silence feels safer, a decision to keep going when quitting looks easier, a moment of kindness offered to someone in need. The ordinary is the soil in which the extraordinary grows. This is why dismissing people as unimportant is not only wrong, it is dangerous. It ignores the reality that greatness is not born in palaces or boardrooms, but in kitchens, classrooms, and quiet corners of communities where resilience is practiced every single day. Ordinary people also carry the unique power of relatability. When someone in your own neighborhood achieves something remarkable, it awakens the sense that you, too, can rise. When a colleague earns a promotion after years of dedication, it proves effort is not in vain. When a mother starts a small business from her living room and turns it into something sustainable, it inspires others who feel invisible to try as well. The impact multiplies because it feels attainable. The woman who rose to leadership understood this deeply. She knew her story was not only her own, but also a mirror for others who were told they did not belong. Her ascent from ordinary beginnings became a symbol of what was possible, not only for her, but for every person watching who carried dreams in their heart. Extraordinary impact does not require perfection. It does not require wealth. It does not require fame. What it requires is conviction, the courage to act, the humility to keep moving even when no one is watching. Ordinary people change the world because they do not wait for the world to notice them first. Across every town and every city, there are people already building futures that will ripple far beyond their own lives. The child who teaches herself to code in a library may become the innovator who reshapes industries. The farmer experimenting with sustainable practices may become the pioneer who feeds generations. The community organizer gathering neighbors to demand justice may plant the seeds of reform that will endure for decades. What binds all these people together is not that they were born extraordinary, but that they chose to act in ordinary moments with extraordinary belief. Fear is one of the oldest instincts we know. It tells us to be cautious, to pull back, to protect ourselves. In its place, fear can be a shield, keeping us safe from danger. But when fear grows too strong, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a prison. And inside that prison, dreams wither, opportunities fade, lives remain smaller than they were meant to be. Faith is what breaks that prison. Faith is the quiet voice that says, "There is more." It does not erase fear, but it rises above it. Faith does not guarantee certainty, but it insists on possibility. For the woman who was told she didn't belong in business, fear was always present. Fear of failing publicly, where her mistakes would not be hers alone, but magnified by the lens of prejudice. Fear of risking everything on an idea no one else believed in. Fear of being laughed at again and again until laughter became the soundtrack of her ambition. Fear of proving her critics right. But she learned what every leader, every dreamer, every change maker eventually discovers: fear will never leave. The question is not whether you will feel fear. The question is which voice you will listen to more loudly. She chose faith. Faith in her vision, even when others mocked it. Faith in her ability, even when her confidence faltered. Faith in a future she could not yet see, even when the present looked bleak. Faith is not blind. Faith does not mean ignoring reality or pretending that challenges do not exist. Faith means seeing the challenge, acknowledging the difficulty, and believing that something greater is possible anyway. It is the courage to take one more step when fear demands that you stand still. History is filled with this same lesson. Martin Luther King Jr. marched through cities where violence threatened at every corner. Fear was present. Yet faith guided his steps, faith in a world that had not yet been built. When astronauts took flight into the unknown, fear surrounded them, yet faith in science and human ingenuity carried them beyond Earth's limits. When immigrants left behind everything familiar to cross oceans in search of a better life, fear could have chained them to the shore, but faith gave them the courage to move. Fear whispers, "You can't." Faith replies, "What if I can?" Fear asks, "What if you fail?" Faith answers, "What if I succeed?" Fear says, "Stay where it's safe." Faith insists, is never safe, but it is always worth it. Everyday people wrestle with this same choice. The student afraid to apply to a school that feels out of reach must decide whether to let fear dictate their destiny or let faith push the application through. The entrepreneur staring at an empty bank account must decide whether fear will shut down the dream or faith will sustain it through another season. The worker debating whether to speak up about injustice must choose between fear of losing their job and faith in the belief that their voice matters. Faith over fear is not a single decision. It is a daily practice. Each morning, you wake up and decide which voice will carry you forward. Sometimes faith is bold, a leap into the unknown. Other times faith is quiet, a steady hand keeping you on course. For the woman who refused to shrink, faith gave her resilience. But fear would have silenced her, but faith allowed her to keep speaking. Fear would have told her she was alone, but faith reminded her that others would one day follow. Fear would have forced her to abandon the table, but faith empowered her to build her own. Fear thrives in uncertainty. Faith thrives in vision. Fear magnifies obstacles. Faith magnifies possibility. Fear demands comfort. Faith requires courage. The most remarkable truth is that fear and faith often arrive together, but only one can lead. For generations, leadership has often been defined by narrow images: the figure at the head of a long table, the commanding voice on a stage, the powerful hand signing laws or contracts that shape lives. Leadership was imagined as authority, hierarchy, control. But the truth is, leadership is not a title you wear, nor is it a position you inherit. Leadership is the act of lifting others while you climb, the practice of seeing possibility where others see limits, the courage to stand firm when standing alone feels easier. The woman who would become a CEO understood this instinctively. She knew that simply reaching the top would never be enough if she stood there by herself. The point was not only to lead a company, but to lead a movement of inclusion, resilience, and opportunity. In her eyes, Leadership meant responsibility, the responsibility to open doors for those still waiting in the hallway. When she hired employees, she did not search only for polished RA summaes or impressive credentials. She searched for hunger, for potential, for the spark in someone's eyes that told her they were ready to rise if only given a chance. When she mentored, she did not simply pass down lessons from textbooks. She shared the raw truth of her struggles, the rejections, the doubts, the nights she nearly quit. Because she believed real leadership requires honesty, not perfection. Redefining leadership means shifting the focus away from command and toward connection. True leaders do not measure their greatness by how many people follow them. They measure it by how many people rise because of them. Leadership is not about creating dependency, it is about creating capacity. Throughout history, the leaders who endure are not always the ones with the highest office or the largest armies. They are the ones who touched lives in ways that multiplied beyond their own. Teachers who taught students to think critically. Activists who refused to be silenced. Community organizers who brought neighbors together to fight for justice. Their leadership did not always come with titles, but their influence spread farther than titles ever could. Redefining leadership also means breaking away from the myth that leaders must always be unshakable. Strength is not found in pretending you never falter, it is found in showing others how to rise after you stumble. Vulnerability, seen as weakness, is now one of the most powerful tools of leadership. When leaders admit they do not have all the answers, they invite others to step forward with solutions. When leaders acknowledge fear, they remind others that courage is not the absence of fear, but the act of moving forward despite it. The woman at the helm of her company practiced this form of leadership. She built a culture where questions were not silenced, but welcomed. She created a workplace where innovation could flourish because employees felt safe to try, fail, and try again. She understood that leadership is not about being the smartest person in the room. It is about creating a room where every person feels empowered to bring their brilliance. Redefining leadership requires empathy. It demands listening to those who are often unheard, seeing those who are often invisible. It asks leaders to put themselves in the shoes of the worker struggling to make ends meet, the student balancing dreams with debts, the parent torn between duty and ambition. Leadership rooted in empathy does not weaken authority. It strengthens it by building trust that cannot be shaken. It also requires vision. Leaders are often the ones standing at the edge of what is, daring to point toward what could be. They paint pictures of futures others cannot yet imagine. They rally people not by force, but by faith, inspiring them to walk toward the unknown because they believe in the possibility of something better. Everyday life is full of moments when leadership can be redefined. A student who speaks up for a classmate being bullied redefines leadership. A worker who organizes colleagues to demand fairness redefines leadership. A parent who instills resilience in a child redefines leadership. None of these people may carry a title, but all of them shape futures. Leadership is not reserved for the few. It belongs to anyone willing to step forward when the world steps back. No individual rises entirely on their own. Behind every success story is a community, visible or unseen, that has played a part in shaping, guiding, or sustaining the journey. Empowerment, then, is not only about lifting ourselves, but about creating conditions where entire communities can flourish. True progress is never measured by what one person achieves alone. It is measured by how many lives are touched, transformed, and uplifted along the way. The woman who was told she didn't belong in business understood this truth deeply. Her journey was not only about proving the doubters wrong for her own sake. It was about proving to her community, those who had been silenced, underestimated, and left out of opportunity, that they had the right to believe in more. When she built her company, she didn't see it as a monument to her own ambition, but as a platform that could give others a voice, a job, a chance. Community empowerment begins with recognition that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. There are children in underfunded schools with brilliance in their minds, but no access to resources. There are workers with unmatched dedication who will never rise in a system designed to overlook them. There are neighborhoods rich in creativity and culture, yet dismissed because they don't fit into traditional models of power or success. Empowerment means seeing what others ignore and choosing to invest where others have withdrawn. She chose to mentor young entrepreneurs from her community, not because it was profitable, but because she knew the value of someone believing in you when few others will. She built internships not for those with the longest RA but for those with the deepest hunger to learn. She understood that one person's success could become a catalyst, creating a ripple effect that multiplies across families, neighborhoods, and generations. Empowering a community is not charity. It is not about giving handouts. It is about unlocking doors, removing barriers, and equipping people with the tools to walk through on their own. It is about dignity, offering not just help, but the chance to stand tall and know you earned your place. History shows us that community empowerment is always the seed of transformation. When women were given the right to vote, communities everywhere grew stronger because more voices entered the conversation. When Black entrepreneurs built businesses during the Harlem Renaissance, they created spaces of culture, employment, and pride that resonated far beyond their walls. When immigrants formed neighborhoods rooted in mutual support, they built legacies that became integral to entire nations. Empowered communities are unstoppable forces of progress. Empowerment also reshapes identity. A child who sees someone from their own background running a company suddenly believes they can too. A worker who watches a colleague rise to leadership understands that their effort matters. Representation is not symbolic. It is transformative. It changes what people believe is possible. But empowerment requires sacrifice. It requires leaders who are willing to slow their own climb so they can extend a hand to someone behind them. It requires companies that invest in training instead of simply extracting labor. It requires communities themselves to look inward and ask how they can support one another rather than waiting for outside saviors to arrive. She made these sacrifices willingly because she knew her story was never just about her. Every job she created, every young person she mentored, every partnership she forged, it was all part of a larger mission to prove that communities thrive when they lift together. Ordinary people can practice community empowerment every day. A neighbor who watches out for the children on the block, a teacher who stays after hours to tutor a struggling student, a business owner who hires locally, investing directly into the lives of those around them. These acts may seem small, but multiplied, they transform entire ecosystems. Community empowerment is not a single act. It is a continuous cycle. When one person is lifted, they gain the ability to lift others. When one door is opened, more doors can follow. When one story shifts, the narrative for all begins to change. When people speak of legacy, they often think of wealth, property, or a name etched into history. But there is another kind of legacy, one far more enduring. It is the legacy of resilience, the ability to endure struggle, to stand firm when the winds of adversity howl, and to leave behind not just what you built, but how you built it. Resilience is not inherited like money, nor is it taught like a school lesson. It is passed down in the way a grandmother tells her story of surviving hardships, in the way a father refuses to quit despite exhaustion, in the way a mother holds her head high even when the world tries to bow it low. Children watch, absorb, and learn, and in that silent transmission, resilience becomes legacy. The woman, who was told she didn't belong in business, carried the resilience of generations before her. Her ancestors knew rejection, poverty, and prejudice. They lived in a world that denied them rights, yet they survived, worked, and dreamed anyway. That survival was not just for themselves. It was a gift handed forward. When she faced laughter, rejection, and barriers, she did not stand alone. She stood on the shoulders of those who had endured before her. Their resilience became her inheritance. But inheritance is only the beginning. She understood that her responsibility was not only to carry resilience, but to expand it, to pass it forward in a way that would inspire and strengthen those who came after her. Each obstacle she overcame was not just a personal victory. It was a brick in the foundation of resilience that her children, her employees, her community could stand upon. Resilience as legacy is powerful because it multiplies. One act of endurance inspires another. A young woman sees her mother work 2 jobs without giving up and learns to persist in her own education. A child watches his father face rejection yet continue to pursue his craft and discovers that failure is not final. The lesson is absorbing. We do not stop at the first barrier, nor the second, nor the third. We continue, and in continuing, we create a path for others. History is filled with legacies of resilience. Enslaved people who endured the unimaginable and still sang songs of hope left behind a legacy that fueled movements for freedom. Immigrants who arrived with nothing but determination left behind stories that taught future generations the value of persistence. Leaders who faced prison, exile, and oppression yet refused to surrender created legacies that inspire nations to this day. Resilience is rarely celebrated at the moment. At the time, it looked like struggle, sacrifice, quiet determination in the face of overwhelming odds. But later, when the story is told, it becomes a source of strength for others. Legacies are not built only in triumph. They are built in the long, grueling seasons when triumph feels far away. To leave resilience as a legacy is to offer more than advice. It is to give a living example. Words can be forgotten, but actions leave imprints. A child may not remember every lecture, but they will remember watching a parent refuse to give up. An employee may not remember every strategy, but they will remember a leader who stood firm when the company faced a crisis. A community may not recall every detail, but they will remember the ones who endured when endurance seemed impossible. She chose to embody resilience not only for herself, but for those who would come after. Every time she stood back up after being knocked down, she was sending a message to the next generation: strength is possible, even here. Every time she refused to let rejection stop her, she carved deeper into the story she would leave behind. Perseverance is not optional, it is essential. Resilience as legacy changes the way people see themselves. Instead of being defined by what they lack, they become defined by what they survived. Instead of being shaped by what was denied, they are shaped by how they endured. And in that shift, resilience becomes more than survival. It becomes the inheritance that allows others to rise higher than the generation before them. Stereotypes are cages built from assumptions. They reduce people to caricatures, stripping away complexity, individuality, and possibility. They whisper limitations before a person has even spoken, deciding what they can and cannot do based on race, gender, class, or background. These cages are invisible to some, but for those forced inside them, the bars are heavy and unyielding. For the black woman who dreamed of leading in business, stereotypes trailed her like shadows. They told her she was too ambitious, too emotional, too unfit to lead. They claimed her ideas lacked seriousness, her voice lacked authority, her presence lacked legitimacy. When she entered rooms, she was often seen not as a leader, but as a token, a symbol, a quota to be checked. These stereotypes were not just opinions, they were barriers that determined whether doors opened or slammed shut. Breaking stereotypes requires more than denial, it requires defiance. She knew she could not simply argue against them with words, she had to shatter them with results. Every deal she closed, every employee she lifted, every milestone she achieved was a hammer against the walls of the cage. But breaking stereotypes is not only about proving others wrong, it is about reclaiming identity on your own terms. Too often, people live their lives in reaction, defining themselves only in opposition to what others assume. She chose a different path. She defined herself not by their limits, but by her vision. In doing so, she made it clear her identity was not theirs to write. History is filled with those who broke stereotypes, and in doing so, reshaped entire narratives. Jackie Robinson did more than play baseball. He broke a stereotype that claimed black athletes could not compete at the highest level. Marie Curie did more than conduct research. She shattered the stereotype that women could not excel in science. Barack Obama did more than run for office. He broke the stereotype that the presidency was a place reserved only for certain faces. Each act of defiance against stereotypes has ripple effects far beyond the individual. When one person breaks through, others begin to see cracks in the walls that once seemed impenetrable. A young girl who sees a woman leading a company suddenly knows that gender does not dictate destiny. A young boy who sees someone who looks like him in a position of influence begins to believe that he too can rise. Breaking stereotypes also demands resilience because the world does not surrender its prejudices easily. Even after achievements, the whispers continue. Even after victories, the doubts persist. Success does not always silence stereotypes. It often makes them louder. but persistence in the face of them creates undeniable proof. Proof that stereotypes are lies dressed as truths. Proof that ability cannot be predicted by prejudice. Proof that worth is not determined by the narrow imagination of others. It also requires courage to embrace complexity. Types thrive on simplicity. All women are this. All black people are that. All leaders must look like this. To live authentically, to embrace the fullness of your humanity, is to reject those reductions. She chose to lead with both strength and empathy, with both authority and vulnerability. In doing so, she showed that leadership does not need to conform to rigid molds. It can evolve, expand, and reflect the diversity of human experience. In communities everywhere, ordinary people break stereotypes every day. The son of immigrants who becomes the first in his family to graduate from college. The young woman from a rural town who becomes an engineer despite being told the field is not for her. The elder who learns new skills in a digital age, defying assumptions that growth belongs only to the young. These acts may not make headlines, but they chip away at the cages of expectation, one bar at a time. Stereotypes may be ancient, passed down through generations, reinforced by systems and cloaked in tradition, but every generation has the power to weaken them further. Each success story that contradicts the stereotype is a crack in the cage. Each act of courage that refuses the box expands the horizon of what is possible. Each life lived authentically sends a message that cannot be ignored. No one has the right to limit the human spirit. Every dreamer, at one point or another, hears the sound of doubters. It is rarely a single voice, it is a chorus. Sometimes it comes as laughter. Sometimes as dismissive silence. Sometimes as cutting words spoken with such certainty that they can feel heavier than stone. Doubt, when it comes from others, has a way of echoing in the mind long after the moment has passed. For her, the sound of doubters was loud from the very beginning. They told her she didn't belong in boardrooms. They told her she was reaching too far, daring too much. They laughed when she spoke of her vision, not because they had better ideas, but because they could not imagine someone like her shaping the future of business. Their doubt was not born of her limitations, but of their own inability to see beyond the stereotypes and assumptions they carried. Doubt is powerful because it disguises itself as truth. When spoken with confidence, it can feel like prophecy. You can't do this? This isn't for people like you. It's impossible. These are not just words. They are attempts to build walls around ambition. Many never climb beyond those walls. Some even accept them as real, believing the doubters must know something they don't. But she understood that the sound of doubters, no matter how loud, only noise. Noise is not destiny, noise is not true. She learned to let their words wash over her without sinking in. Instead of allowing their voices to dictate her path, she used them as fuel. Every laugh became a reminder of why she had to push forward. Every dismissal became evidence of how much her success would matter. The sound of doubters is not unique to her. History remembers countless moments where progress was met with laughter or disbelief. When the Wright brothers spoke of flight, they were mocked. When women demanded the right to vote, they were ridiculed. When civil rights leaders spoke of equality, they were dismissed as dreamers. The doubters were always there, loud and certain, yet history proved them wrong. What makes doubt so insidious is that it often comes from those closest to us. Sometimes it is not the stranger in the crowd, but the friend, the family member, or the colleague who says, "Be realistic." They believe they are protecting you from failure. They believe they are sparing you disappointment. But what they do not realize is that by limiting your imagination, they are also trying to limit your future. To rise above the sound of doubters requires courage not only to ignore strangers, but sometimes to defy the expectations of those you love. The sound of doubters is not always possible. They may never stop talking. The world will always have critics ready to explain why something cannot be done. But what is possible and necessary is to change the weight of those voices in your mind. She taught herself to turn down their volume and turn up her own. She chose to amplify the sound of her belief, her vision, her persistence until the doubters became background noise. There is a lesson here for every person with a dream. The sound of doubters is not proof of your failure, it is proof of the size of your vision. People rarely doubt small dreams. It is only when the dream threatens to change what they know, what they expect, or what they believe possible that the doubters grow loud. Their resistance is not a sign to stop. It is a sign that you are pushing into uncharted territory. Children hear the sound of doubters when they reach higher than their circumstances suggest. Entrepreneurs hear it when they try to build something new in a world that clings to the old. Innovators hear it when they challenge systems that benefit from staying the same. And yet, time and again, those who choose to persevere despite the noise are the ones who reshape what the world believes can be done. The sound of doubters will never vanish completely, but neither will the sound of hope, of determination, of quiet persistence that grows louder with each step forward. The choice is never whether doubt exists, but which sound we choose to let guide us. Faith is not the absence of struggle. Faith is the decision to keep walking even when the path is not yet visible. It is the steady conviction that something better is possible, even when every piece of evidence around you suggests otherwise. Faith is what sustains people in the long stretch between planting seeds and seeing harvest. It is what carries the human spirit through uncertainty, rejection, and silence. For her, faith in the unseen was not a choice born out of luxury. It was a necessity. When she was told, "You don't belong in business," she did not have guarantees of success. She did not have investors lined up or doors flung open to welcome her in. What she had was a vision no one else could see yet. She pictured the business she wanted to build, the people she wanted to employ, the impact she wanted to leave, long before it existed. She chose to believe in the unseen, because without that belief, she would have had nothing to move toward. Faith in the unseen has always been the fuel of change. Harriet Tubman led enslaved people north without maps or technology, but with faith in freedom she could not yet touch. Who devote their lives to cures for diseases hold faith that one day their discoveries will heal, even as they spend years staring at failure after failure. Parents working multiple jobs often do so with faith in an unseen future where their children will live lives beyond struggle. In each case, faith is the bridge between where we stand and where we dream to go. Faith, however, is not blind. It does not ignore reality. It acknowledges difficulty, it sees the obstacles, it feels the weight of uncertainty. But it chooses to move anyway. Faith says, "I know what is, but I also believe in what could be." That belief creates courage, and courage creates motion. Her faith was tested often. There were days when she questioned herself, when the silence of unanswered calls and unopened doors was deafening. There were times when failure felt permanent, when it seemed the doubters might have been right. Faith in the unseen is never easy. It is fragile, constantly tested by delays, setbacks, and loneliness. Yet each time she stood at the edge of despair, she reminded herself of the vision. She spoke it aloud. She held it in her heart, and step by step she built what once was invisible. Faith in the unseen is also contagious. When one person believes strongly enough, others begin to believe too. A team gathers, not because they already see the outcome, but because they trust the conviction of the leader. Families endure hard seasons because one person insists that better days are ahead. Communities rally because someone speaks with a voice strong enough to make the unseen feel tangible. Her belief in her business gave confidence to employees who once doubted their own potential. By holding faith for herself, she held faith for others. There is also a discipline to faith. It is not simply hoping, it is acting. Faith without work is only a wish. She understood this deeply. She paired her faith with long nights of planning, endless networking, relentless effort. She invested not just her resources but her entire being into making the unseen visible. Faith gave her direction, but discipline made the vision real. In every generation, the ones who shift the world forward are those who believe before others do. They hold faith not only in themselves but in the unseen possibilities of society itself. Abolitionists believed in a world without slavery before such a world seemed possible. Suffragettes believed in a world where women's voices mattered before it was allowed. Innovators believed in technologies long before they were practical. Faith in the unseen has always been the birthplace of transformation. The unseen is not empty. It is full of potential waiting for those who dare to trust it. To have faith is to choose possibility over resignation, vision over limitation, over fear. Belonging is more than being present in a room. It is being seen, valued, and respected within it. It is the quiet assurance that your presence is not tolerated but cherished, that your voice matters, that your contributions are not only welcome but essential. Belonging is not about fitting into spaces built by others. It is about reshaping those spaces until they reflect the dignity of everyone within them. For her, belonging had always been withheld. In school, she was often told she was different. In workplaces, she was overlooked for leadership roles despite her talent. In boardrooms, she was sometimes the only black woman at the table, and the weight of that isolation pressed heavily. The message was unspoken yet clear: she could be present, but she did not belong. That is the wound of exclusion. To be told not with words, but with silence, with dismissive glances, with doors that never open, that you are an outsider. Many people carry that wound. They learn to shrink themselves, to mute their voices, to twist their identities into shapes that might be more palatable to others. But true belonging cannot be earned by erasing yourself. It must be claimed by standing fully as who you are. She chose not to bend herself into someone else's mold. Instead, she built spaces where belonging was not conditional, but foundational. In her company, she made sure every employee knew that their ideas mattered, whether they were interns or executives. She ensured her workplace reflected the diversity of the community it served, not because it was fashionable, but because it was right. For her, belonging was not an afterthought. It was the heart of her leadership. The power of belonging is transformative. When people feel they belong, they do not hold back. They bring their full creativity, their boldest ideas, their truest selves. Belonging ignites innovation because it allows people to think without fear. It strengthens resilience because it reminds individuals that they are not alone. It fosters loyalty because people stay where they feel valued. History shows us what happens when belonging is denied. Segregation, exclusion, discrimination, all of these are systems built on the lie that certain people do not deserve to belong. These systems not only wounded individuals, but robbed societies of untapped brilliance. How many innovators, leaders, and creators were silenced because they were told they did not belong? How much progress was delayed because entire communities were shut out of opportunity? But history also shows us the triumph of belonging reclaimed. When once marginalized groups demanded the right to vote, to learn, to work, to lead, they were not only asking for equality, they were demanding belonging, and with every breakthrough, the world became richer, more creative, more just. Belonging begins at the personal level. It is the teacher who tells a child, "You matter here?" It is the manager who listens to the youngest employee as seriously as the most senior. It is the neighbor who opens their home and says, "You are part of this community." These moments, though small, weave together into something powerful, a culture where people no longer wonder if they are outsiders. She understood that her success meant little if it did not create belonging for others. She refused to accept being the only one in the room as a permanent condition. Instead, she opened doors for more to walk through. She spoke boldly, not only for herself but for those who had not yet been invited in. She achieved milestones she did not celebrate alone. She celebrated with her community because she knew belonging was never about one, but about all. The power of belonging is not just emotional, it is practical. Teams that feel connected outperform those fractured by exclusion. Communities bound by belonging are safer, stronger, and more resilient than those divided by suspicion. Nations that embrace belonging rise higher than those splintered by division. Belonging is not a luxury. It is a necessity for growth, for progress, for humanity itself. At its core, belonging affirms a truth that every person longs to hear: you are not alone. You are not invisible. You are part of something greater, and that greatness is incomplete without you. What began as ridicule became revelation. What started as laughter turned into legacy. They told her she didn't belong in business, but she showed them that belonging is not granted by others. It is claimed by standing firmly in your purpose. Her story is not simply about building a company. It is about building hope. It is about shattering ceilings so others can see the sky. It is about proving that resilience, faith, vision are more powerful than doubt, prejudice, or exclusion. She did not just prove them wrong, She proved to the world what is possible when one person refuses to be defined by the limits of others. And now, the question belongs to us. How will we answer doubt when it comes knocking? How will we lift communities that are told they don't belong? How will we carry forward the legacy of resilience, faith, and belonging so that generations yet to come will not hear laughter, but applause when they dare to dream? The future is waiting. It is shaped not by those who doubt, but by those who believe, by those who act, by those who rise.